January 22nd, 1984. Super Bowl 18. Third quarter. 96 million Americans watching. The screen goes dark. What appears next will run for 60 seconds. Cost $1.5 million to produce. Another $500,000 to air. And it will never show the product it's selling. Within 48 hours, 72,000 people will walk into stores to buy a computer most of them have never seen. Within 12 months, personal computers will stop being tools for hobbyists and engineers and become something else entirely: household appliances. This is the story of the year. Computing left the office and invaded your home, and how that invasion destroyed more jobs than it created. The commercial opens in gray. Rows of identical men in gray uniforms march through industrial corridors. Shaved heads, blank faces, moving in lockstep. They file into an auditorium. A massive screen dominates the room. A face appears. Big Brother. We are one people, with one will, one resolve, one cause. The voice drones on about unification and conformity. Then she appears. A woman in bright red shorts and a white tank top, running, pursued by riot police in black helmets. She's carrying a sledgehammer. She sprints down the center aisle as Big Brother's face fills the screen. We shall prevail, the voice declares. She winds up, throws the hammer with everything she has. The screen explodes in white light. Text appears. On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984. 60 seconds. No product shot. No features. No price. Just a promise. Freedom. Here's what nobody tells you about that commercial. Apple's board hated it. They watched the rough cut in October 1983. Told the marketing team it was the worst ad they'd ever seen. Demanded it be scrapped. A marketing firm, Chiat Day, was ordered to sell back the Super Bowl airtime. They claimed they could only sell off the 30-second spot. The 60-second slot couldn't be unloaded. That was a lie. They never tried to sell it. And on January 22nd, the full 60-second commercial aired during the third most watched Super Bowl in history. The board was furious until the phone started ringing. January 24th, 1984. 2 days after the Super Bowl. Flint Center Auditorium, Cupertino, California. Steve Jobs stands on stage in front of 2,500 shareholders and invited guests. He's 29 years old, wearing a double-breasted suit, bow tie. He reaches into a bag and pulls out a beige box 9 inches tall. The Macintosh. The computer speaks. Hello, I am Macintosh. It sure is great to get out of that bag. The crowd erupts. This is where it turns. Because what Jobs is selling isn't technology. He's selling identity. The Macintosh costs $2,495. That's $7,000 in today's money. For a computer with 128 kilobytes of memory, barely enough to run 2 programs at once. It has no hard drive. You store files on floppy disks. It has no color. Black and white screen only. And it runs almost no software. A word processor called MacWrite. A drawing program called MacPaint. That's it, but it has one thing nothing else does. A mouse. You don't type commands. You point and click on icons. Move windows around. Draw with your cursor. No coding, no manuals, no training. Anyone can use it. And this is the part they don't talk about. In January 1984, only 8% of American households owned a computer. 8%. The rest were terrified of them. Computers were intimidating, complex, designed for engineers who spoke a language of prompts and syntax errors. If you wanted to copy a file on an IBM PC, you typed copy C, file name, txta, 1 typo, 1 wrong slash, error message, start over. The Macintosh let you drag a picture of a file to a picture of a disk. Done. This wasn't just easier. It was liberation from needing to understand how machines worked. And for 92% of American families who didn't own computers, that mattered more than technical specs. But here's what the commercial promised that the computer couldn't deliver: freedom. The 1984 ad positioned the Macintosh as rebellion against IBM, the beige corporate giant, Big Brother. In reality, IBM was winning. By January 1984, the IBM PC and its clones accounted for 2 million units sold annually. Apple's best year for the Apple II was 1 million units in 1984. That was 15% of the total market. The Macintosh launched with 6% market share. 6% isn't revolution. It's a niche. And within 12 months, that niche would start collapsing. 1984 ended with personal computer ownership reaching 13% of American households. 5% growth in 1 year. But here's what that number doesn't show. Who got left behind? Households earning under $25,000 a year, 2% computer ownership. Households earning over $75,000, 38%. The digital divide wasn't created in 1984. It was cemented. Because computers weren't tools for everyone. They were luxury goods for families who could afford to gamble $2,000 to $5,000 on a machine that might become essential, or might sit in a closet unused. And this is where the moral imbalance emerges. The Macintosh promised to democratize computing. The computer for the rest of us, the tagline said. But at $7,000 in today's money, the rest of us meant upper middle class families. Everyone else was locked out, not because they didn't want computers, because they couldn't afford the entry fee to the future. By the end of 1984, over 1 million Macintosh units had been manufactured. 72,000 sold in the first 100 days. Good, not revolutionary. And within 2 years, sales would collapse so badly that Steve Jobs would be forced out of the company he founded, because the commercial promised a revolution. But the product delivered an expensive machine with almost no software, incompatible with everything businesses already used. You can't liberate people with a device they can't afford and don't need yet. But that 60-second commercial did something else. It made computing feel inevitable. Before 1984, personal computers were optional. Hobbyist tools, business equipment. After 1984, they felt like the future. And if you didn't own one, you were being left behind. That fear sold more computers than the technology ever did. The Macintosh didn't win 1984. IBM dominated. The Commodore 64 outsold everything. Most homes still didn't have a computer. But Apple convinced millions of people that they should. Not because it would make their lives easier, because everyone else was buying in. And that fear of missing out was more powerful than any feature list. The 1984 commercial wasn't selling a product. It was selling anxiety. And anxiety became the most effective sales tool in the technology industry for the next 40 years. March 1984. Colonial Mutual Life Assurance Society, Melbourne, Australia. 100 clerk typists report to work Monday morning. By Friday, 98 of them no longer have jobs. The company installed 12 word processors. 12 machines replaced 100 people. The remaining 2 became supervisors managing 29 operators who fed documents into terminals all day. Cost savings, immediate. Human cost, never calculated. This is the part they don't talk about when they celebrate 1984 as the year personal computing took off. For every family that bought a Macintosh to feel liberated, a dozen workers lost the jobs computers made obsolete. And it happened so fast, most people didn't notice until it was already over. August 12, 1981. IBM launches the IBM Personal Computer. Price, $1,565 for the base model. It's beige. It's boring. It has no graphics, no mouse, no personality. You control it by typing commands in a language called DOS. C prompt, greater than symbol, blinking cursor. If you wanted to see what files were on your disk, you typed dir. If you wanted to copy something, copy one mistake, one wrong letter, error message, start over. It was intimidating, complex, designed for people who already understood computers. And businesses loved it. Here's what made the IBM PC different from the Apple II or Commodore 64. IBM had credibility. For 50 years, IBM had been the technology standard for corporations, mainframes, data processing, enterprise systems. When IBM said personal computers were legitimate business tools, every purchasing manager in America listened. By 1983, IBM sold 750,000 PCs, more than Apple, more than everyone else combined. By 1984, IBM's PC revenue hit $4 billion, twice Apple's total revenue. And 67% of large corporations standardizing on personal computers chose IBM. 9% chose Apple. This is where it turns. Because IBM didn't win by making better computers. They won by making computers businesses could justify buying. 1984. American corporations face a problem. Office productivity hasn't improved in 20 years, despite massive investment in equipment. Secretaries still type letters on typewriters. One mistake means retyping the entire page. Filing clerks still manage paper records in metal cabinets. Finding a document means searching by hand. Accountants still calculate spreadsheets on ledger paper with mechanical adding machines. Middle managers spend hours every week waiting for documents to be typed, filed, retrieved, copied, distributed. The office workflow is a bottleneck strangling growth. And IBM offers a solution. Word processing software, spreadsheets, database programs, all running on desktop machines that cost less than hiring another secretary for a year. The pitch isn't about technology. It's about cutting labor costs. Here's what happened when corporations bought in. Typing pools vanished first. For 50 years, large companies had centralized typing departments. Dozens of women sitting at rows of desks, converting handwritten drafts into typed documents. It was repetitive, low-paid, dead-end work. But it was stable employment for hundreds of thousands of women who didn't have college degrees. Word processors killed that entire occupation in less than 5 years. By 1984, managers and professionals had computers on their desks. They typed their own memos, edited their own letters, printed their own reports. The typist became redundant, and companies celebrated the efficiency. But here's the part nobody tells you. The work didn't disappear. It just shifted. Executives who used to dictate letters to secretaries now spent 2 hours a day typing emails and formatting documents themselves. Professionals who used to hand drafts to typists now stayed late editing spreadsheets. The computer didn't eliminate work. It redistributed it upward to higher-paid employees who were now doing clerical tasks for free. Productivity per worker increased. But total output per dollar spent didn't change. Companies just fired the visible workers and made the invisible ones work longer hours. And this is where the moral imbalance emerges. The executives who decided to buy word processors kept their jobs. The typists who lost their jobs had no say in the decision. One group called it progress. The other group called it unemployment. By 1985, secretarial and clerical employment in the United States peaked and began a permanent decline. Over the next 15 years, 1.5 million clerical jobs disappeared, not outsourced, not automated gradually, eliminated, replaced by software that cost $300, and executives who now spent 10% of their day doing tasks they used to delegate. The efficiency gain was a myth. The labor savings were real, and the workers who paid for it never recovered. 1984. Fortune magazine surveys American companies with personal computers. 56% use IBM PCs. 16% use Apple. The rest use a mixture of Commodore, Tandy, and dozens of failed clones. IBM didn't just dominate the market. They defined what business computing meant. Beige boxes, command line interfaces, compatible software, standardized training, boring, reliable, safe. Apple's Macintosh promised liberation and creativity. IBM's PC promised cost reduction and control. Corporations chose control every time. And by the end of 1984, the personal computer had stopped being personal. It became a tool for eliminating jobs. But here's what companies didn't expect. The workers they kept had to learn an entirely new skill: typing. Before 1984, executives didn't type. Secretaries typed. Professionals dictated. Managers wrote by hand. Typists converted everything to clean documents. That division of labor had existed for 80 years. Word processors destroyed it in 18 months. Suddenly, middle-aged managers who had never touched a typewriter were expected to type their own reports. Professionals who couldn't type had to hunt and peck at keyboards, while younger colleagues who'd grown up with computers left them behind. The computer didn't just eliminate jobs. It created a new mandatory skill that a generation of workers never learned. And companies didn't care, adapt or leave. By December 1984, over 2 million IBM PCs and compatibles had been sold. Apple sold 1.4 million computers total that year, including the Macintosh, Apple II, and everything else. IBM won, not because their computers were better, because their customers understood that technology wasn't about empowerment or creativity or liberation. It was about reducing headcount. The Macintosh ad promised that 1984 wouldn't be like 1984. It was wrong. 1984 was exactly like Orwell's vision, except Big Brother wasn't a government. It was a beige box on every desk, monitoring productivity, eliminating redundancy, and making sure every worker was doing the job of 3 people. The only difference: people lined up to buy it, because the alternative was being the one whose job got eliminated. Corporations didn't adopt computers to liberate workers. They adopted them to reduce the number of workers they needed. And 1984 was the year that strategy went mainstream. The typing pool didn't disappear because technology made it obsolete. It disappeared because executives realized they could make someone else do that work for free. And they called it progress. December 25th, 1984. Christmas morning. 300,000 American families unwrapped the same gift: a Commodore 64 home computer. Price: $199 on sale, down from $595 when it launched 2 years earlier. It's beige plastic. Connects to your television. Comes with a tape drive that loads programs in 5 minutes of screeching noise. And it has no purpose. No spreadsheets for work. No word processor for school assignments. No practical applications whatsoever. It plays games. Runs simple programs kids type out of magazines. Teaches a programming language called BASIC that most children will never use again. But parents bought it anyway. Because by December 1984, not having a computer felt like failing your children. This is the story of how computers invaded homes before anyone figured out why they belonged there. Here's what nobody tells you about home computers in 1984. They were glorified toys marketed as educational necessities. The pitch was simple and terrifying. Your child needs to learn computers now, or they'll be left behind forever. Every ad, every article, every conversation at parent-teacher conferences, the message was the same. If your child doesn't have a computer at home, they won't be able to compete in the future. And this is where it turns. Because that future didn't exist yet. In 1984, computer literacy wasn't a job requirement. Most offices didn't have personal computers. Most careers didn't involve typing. Most jobs required skills you learned on the job, not from a Commodore 64 in your basement. But the fear worked anyway. September 1984. Study published by the Educational Testing Service. Findings. Home computers could create a sharp division between children who have access and children who don't. Middle-income and upper-income families. 28% own computers. Families earning under $15,000 a year. 3%. The study warns that computers in affluent homes could widen the achievement gap between rich and poor students. Nobody listens. Because by 1984, the decision isn't about education anymore. It's about status. Owning a home computer signals that you can afford to invest in your child's future. Not owning one signals that you can't or won't, and that judgment is more powerful than any rational analysis of whether a 7-year-old actually benefits from typing "Hello World" 50 times. Here's what a Commodore 64 actually did in most homes. Games. Endless games. Load a cartridge. Wait 5 minutes for a cassette tape to screech. Watch blocky graphics appear on your TV. Kids played for hours. Parents tolerated it because it was educational. Educational how? Hand-eye coordination. Problem solving. Logic. The same skills they got from board games and puzzles and playing outside. But the computer made it feel like learning because it was expensive and intimidating and involved technology. And in 1984, anything involving technology was automatically considered preparation for the future, even when it was just Pac-Man on a television. But here's what parents didn't expect. The computer took over the living room. In 1984, most families had one television. It sat in the living room. Everyone shared it. The computer plugged into that television, which meant when a child used the computer, nobody else could watch TV. Families that bought home computers to bring the family together discovered they'd introduced a new source of conflict. Dinner interrupted because a program was loading. Parents missing the evening news because a child was typing code from a magazine. Siblings fighting over whose turn it was to use the screen. The computer didn't enhance family life. It fractured it. And here's the part they don't talk about. Most computers ended up in closets within 2 years. 1984. Commodore sells 2.5 million 64 units that year alone. More than Apple. More than IBM. More than everyone else combined. Total Commodore 64 sales by the end of 1984. 3.5 million units. Most of them sitting in American homes. Rarely used. Gathering dust. Because once the novelty wore off, there was nothing to do with them. No internet. No email. No social connection. Just a blinking cursor and a thick manual written for engineers. Kids lost interest after a month. Parents felt guilty about the $300 they spent on a machine that became furniture. And everyone pretended it was still a valuable learning tool because admitting otherwise meant admitting they'd been sold a fantasy. But here's what the computer companies understood that parents didn't. They weren't selling utility. They were selling fear. Fear that your child would be unprepared. Fear that other families were getting ahead. Fear that technology was moving faster than you could understand, and your child would be left behind if he didn't buy in now. The Commodore 64 didn't make kids better at math or reading or problem solving. Multiple studies in the late 1980s would prove that. Children with home computers performed no better academically than children without them. In some cases, they performed worse because screen time replaced homework and reading. But by the time those studies were published, it was too late. Millions of families had already bought computers they didn't need for benefits that didn't exist. And the industry had moved on to selling the next fear. December 1984. 8% of American households own a computer. Broken down by income. Families earning under $20,000, 2%. Families earning over $50,000, 23%. The digital divide isn't a future problem. It's already here. And it's not about access to technology. It's about which families can afford to gamble $300 to $2,000 on a machine that might become important someday. Wealthy families bought computers as insurance. Poor families couldn't afford the premium. And when computers did become essential 10 years later, the kids who grew up with them had a massive advantage. Not because the Commodore 64 taught them anything useful, but because they'd already learned not to be intimidated by screens and keyboards and error messages. Comfort with technology became the real divide, and it was purchased, not learned. By the end of 1984, American families owned 4.2 million home computers total, most of them used for games. A small fraction used for learning programming that would be obsolete within 5 years. Almost none used for anything that meaningfully improved a child's education or career prospects. But the narrative was set. Computers are essential for your child's future. Buy now or fall behind forever. That message sold millions of machines in 1984, and it's still selling them 42 years later. The Commodore 64 didn't change education. It changed parenting. It turned technology into a mandatory expense. Not because it worked, because refusing to buy it made you look like you didn't care about your child's future. And that fear was more valuable than any feature the machine actually had. The computer didn't invade the home because families needed it. It invaded because families were terrified of what would happen if they didn't have it. And once fear becomes the sales pitch, the product becomes irrelevant. September 23rd, 1983. Alamogordo, New Mexico. 14 semi-trucks arrive at a municipal landfill carrying 728,000 Atari game cartridges, crushed by steamroller, covered with concrete, buried in the desert. Among them, millions of copies of E.T. the Extraterrestrial, the worst video game ever made. Cost to develop, $5 million and 5 weeks of programming. Units manufactured, 5 million. Units sold, 1.5 million. The remaining 3.5 million cartridges became toxic waste nobody wanted to buy. By December 1984, Atari had lost over $500 million. The video game industry collapsed, and the wreckage wouldn't be excavated for 31 years. Here's what happened in 1982. Atari was the fastest growing company in American history. Revenue, $2 billion, 40% of Warner Communications' total profit. The Atari 2600 console sat in 15 million homes. Every department store, toy store, and electronics shop in America sold video games. And the market was drowning in garbage. In 1982 alone, Atari and its competitors released over 400 games, most of them unplayable, rushed, broken. Third-party developers discovered they could produce cartridges without Atari's permission. No quality control, no oversight. Shelves filled with titles like Chase the Chuck Wagon. A dog food commercial turned into a game, Custer's Revenge. A pornographic game so offensive it generated lawsuits and congressional hearings. Consumers couldn't tell the difference between good games and trash until after they bought them. And once burned, they stopped buying entirely. Summer 1982. Steven Spielberg releases E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Box office, $792 million. The highest grossing film of all time. Atari sees an opportunity. Pays $25 million for the exclusive rights to make an E.T. video game. Release date, Christmas 1982, 5 months away. The problem, game development normally takes 6 to 12 months. Atari gives programmer Howard Scott Warshaw 5 weeks. 5 weeks to design, code, and test a game that would sell millions of cartridges during the holiday season. He built it in 5 weeks, and it was unplayable. The game opens with E.T. falling into pits. You control E.T. as he walks around a green screen filled with identical pits. You fall into a pit. You levitate out. You fall into another pit immediately. There's no instruction manual explaining what you're supposed to do. No clear objective. No satisfying gameplay. Just endless falling into pits while a timer counts down and you die. Reviewers called it the worst game ever made. Kids who unwrapped it on Christmas morning played for 10 minutes and never touched it again. Parents demanded refunds. Retailers returned millions of unsold copies. But by then, Atari had already manufactured 5 million cartridges. They'd bet the company on a movie tie-in game built in 5 weeks by one programmer. And they lost. This is where it turns. Because E.T. wasn't the problem. It was the symptom. By 1983, the video game industry had stopped making games people wanted to play. They were manufacturing licensed garbage as fast as possible to capitalize on a market they believed would never end. Pac-Man for the Atari 2600, 12 million cartridges manufactured for a console with 10 million owners. Terrible game, flickering graphics, missing features, rushed to market. It sold 7 million copies because the brand was strong. Then customers played it, and they stopped trusting the industry. By mid-1983, retailers were sitting on warehouses full of unsold games. Department stores that devoted entire aisles to video games began liquidating inventory at 90% discounts. Consumers still didn't buy. 1982, $3.2 billion in video game sales. 1985, $100 million. A 97% collapse in 3 years. And this is the part they don't talk about. Video games didn't fail because the technology was bad. They failed because the industry treated customers like idiots who would buy anything with a cartoon character on the box. And customers proved them wrong by walking away entirely. December 1984. Atari is functionally dead. Warner Communications sells the consumer division to Jack Tramiel for $50 million. Tramiel, the founder of Commodore, had just been fired from his own company. He buys Atari's corpse and pivots immediately. No more video games. He focuses on personal computers, the Atari Street line. The 2600 console, the machine that defined home gaming for 5 years, becomes obsolete overnight. Millions of families have consoles sitting under their televisions with no new games being made. The entire video game section at retail stores disappears. Toy stores replace game aisles with action figures and board games. And for 2 years, the conventional wisdom becomes, video games were a fad. They're over. But here's what was happening in Japan while America buried its games in the desert. Nintendo was watching. They'd released the Famicom console in Japan in July 1983. It sold 500,000 units in 2 months. But Nintendo's president, Hiroshi Yamauchi, understood why Atari collapsed. Atari gave too much freedom to third-party developers, and the market was swamped with rubbish, games, so Nintendo designed a system to prevent that. A lockout chip, built into every console. Third-party developers couldn't make games without Nintendo's approval. Nintendo controlled quality. Limited how many games each developer could release per year, tested every title before it shipped. And in October 1985, they launched in the United States. The Nintendo Entertainment System. American retailers didn't want it. They'd been burned. Video games destroyed their profit margins in 1983. Warehouses full of unsold cartridges. Customer complaints. Returns. Nobody wanted to gamble on another console, so Nintendo didn't call it a console. They called it an entertainment system. They bundled it with ROB, a robot that looked like a toy, to distance it from video games. They test-launched in New York City only. Limited release, 50,000 units. If it failed, they'd pull out and abandon the American market. It didn't fail. By December 1986, the NES had sold over 1 million units. By 1990, 30 million units. Nintendo saved the video game industry by learning from Atari's mistakes. They controlled quality. They limited supply. They made sure every game that shipped actually worked. But here's what nobody tells you. The video game crash of 1983 wasn't a technological failure. It was a trust failure. Consumers learned that the industry would lie to them, that licensed games with famous characters were scams, that buying a $40 cartridge was a gamble with terrible odds. And once that trust was broken, the entire market collapsed. Nintendo rebuilt it by doing something radical. They made good games. Consistently. Reliably. Super Mario Bros. Wasn't just fun. It worked. Every time. No glitches, no broken promises. That reliability became the foundation of a $60 billion a year industry. But it took burying 728,000 cartridges in a New Mexico landfill to learn that lesson. 1984 was the year the video game industry officially died in America. Atari lost $500 million. Retailers abandoned the category entirely. Consumers believed video games were a fad that had run its course. And buried under concrete in the desert were millions of cartridges that represented everything wrong with the industry. Rushed products, broken promises, exploitation of customer trust. The graveyard stayed buried until 2014, when archaeologists excavated the site. They found exactly what the legend said. Crushed ET cartridges, Pac-Man, dozens of titles nobody wanted. Physical evidence of the day, an industry committed suicide by prioritizing profit over quality. The video game crash proved something most industries refuse to learn. You can't lie to customers forever. Eventually, they stop believing you. And when that happens, the collapse is faster than anyone predicts. Atari didn't fail because E.T. was a bad game. It failed because it represented a business model built on selling garbage and hoping customers wouldn't notice. They noticed, and they walked away. The desert buried the evidence, but the lesson remained. Trust, once broken, takes a decade to rebuild, and sometimes it never comes back at all. March 1984. Hewlett-Packard launches the LaserInk printer. Price, $3,495. 8 pages per minute. 300 dots per inch resolution. Letter quality output. And it fits on a desk. Within 12 months, over 10,000 print shops across America will realize they're competing with a machine their customers can now buy for the price of 3 months' worth of outsourced printing. Within 5 years, 40% of small commercial printers will close permanently. This is the story of how a desktop printer destroyed an industry that had existed for 500 years. Here's what printing looked like before 1984. If you needed business cards, letterhead, brochures, or newsletters, you went to a print shop. Small businesses everywhere. Family-owned. 1 or 2 offset presses in the back. Typesetters in the front. The process took days. You provided text. Handwritten or typed on paper. A typesetter retyped it using specialized equipment. Set the fonts. Adjusted spacing. Created camera-ready artwork. Then the press operator made printing plates. Loaded ink. Ran test sheets. Adjusted alignment. Finally, your job printed. Hundreds or thousands of copies. Dried, cut, delivered. Minimum order, usually 500 copies. Below that, the setup costs made small runs unprofitable. Cost, $50 to $500 depending on complexity. Timeline, 3 to 7 business days. And this is where it turns. Because every business in America needed printed materials constantly. Invoices, purchase orders, memos, reports, marketing materials. The print shop was essential infrastructure. Until it wasn't. January 23rd, 1985. Apple launches the LaserWriter. Price, $6,995. 300 dots per inch. 8 pages per minute. Postscript support. That last part matters more than anyone realizes. PostScript is a programming language that describes how text and graphics should appear on a page. The LaserWriter doesn't just print dots. It interprets complex layouts, scales fonts perfectly at any size, renders graphics with precision. Combined with the Macintosh and a new program called PageMaker, released in July 1985, you can now design and print professional quality documents entirely on your desk. No typesetter, no print shop, no waiting. This is called desktop publishing, and it destroys livelihoods faster than any technology since the cotton gin. Here's what PageMaker did that nothing else could. You see exactly what will print before you print it. WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. On previous computers, you typed text with invisible formatting codes embedded. You didn't know how it would look until you printed it. PageMaker shows you the page, the fonts, the layout, the images, exactly as they'll appear. You drag text boxes, place photos, adjust margins, change fonts, all with a mouse. No coding, no technical knowledge required. And when you're done, you print to the LaserWriter. Professional quality output, indistinguishable from commercial typesetting. For businesses that printed newsletters, brochures, or internal documents constantly, the math was simple. One LaserWriter cost $6,995, equivalent to 14 print jobs at $500 each. Most businesses spent more than that on printing every year. The LaserWriter paid for itself in 12 months, and the print shop lost a customer forever. But here's the part they don't talk about. The quality wasn't actually as good as professional printing. 300 dots per inch sounds impressive. Commercial offset printing, 1200 to 2400 dpi. Desktop publishing output had visible jagged edges on curves, grainy photos, imperfect alignment. It looked amateur compared to real print work, but it was good enough. And good enough at instant speed killed perfect at 3-day turnaround. Businesses didn't need perfection for internal memos or draft documents. They needed acceptable quality right now. And desktop publishing delivered that. The print shops that survived stopped competing on routine work. They pivoted to high-volume color printing, complex bindery, specialty materials. The small shops that couldn't afford new equipment died, 1984 to 1989. Commercial printing employment in the United States peaks at 570,000 workers. By 1995, 460,000. By 2000, 390,000. 180,000 jobs gone in 16 years. Not outsourced, not automated gradually. Eliminated because businesses bought machines that replaced an entire industry. And this is where the moral imbalance emerges. The companies that bought LaserWriters and PageMaker saved money. The typesetters and print shop owners who lost their businesses had no say in that decision. One group called it efficiency. The other group called it obsolescence. And the workers who spent 20 years learning typesetting skills discovered those skills had zero value in 1985. But here's what nobody expected. Desktop publishing didn't reduce the total amount of printing. It increased it exponentially. Before 1984, printing was expensive. You only printed what you absolutely needed. After 1985, printing was nearly free. Marginal cost per page, pennies. Businesses started printing everything. Every draft, every revision, every memo, every report. Offices filled with paper. By the 1990s, the average office worker used 10,000 sheets of paper per year, double the amount from 1980. The paperless office was supposed to arrive with computers. Instead, computers made it cheaper to print, so everyone printed more. The print shops died. But paper consumption exploded, and the environmental cost of that explosion wouldn't be calculated for another 20 years. 1984. The HP LaserJet ships in March. 10,000 units sold in the first year. 1985. The Apple LaserWriter ships in January. PageMaker releases in July. By December, desktop publishing is an industry. Software companies rush to compete with PageMaker, Quark Express, Ventura Publisher, FrameMaker. Hardware companies build cheaper laser printers. Prices drop from $7,000 to $3,000 and $2,000. By 1990, laser printers are standard office equipment, and the commercial print shop becomes obsolete for 70% of what it used to do. But here's the lesson 1984 teaches. Technology doesn't eliminate work. It redistributes it. Before desktop publishing, businesses paid print shops to handle production. After desktop publishing, businesses did that work themselves. Executives spent hours formatting documents in PageMaker instead of handing rough drafts to professionals. Assistants became amateur graphic designers, learning layout software instead of typing memos. The work didn't disappear. It just moved to people who weren't trained to do it and weren't paid extra for doing it. Productivity per worker increased on paper. But the hidden cost was professionals spending time on tasks outside their expertise. Allow your billing $300 an hour, spending 2 hours formatting a brief in PageMaker. That's $600 of lost billable time to save $50 on printing. But companies didn't calculate it that way. They saw the printing cost savings. They didn't see the opportunity cost of misallocated labor. The HP LaserJet and Apple LaserWriter didn't just kill print shops. They created the expectation that every professional could do everything themselves. Design, layout, typesetting, printing. Skills that used to require years of apprenticeship became something you were expected to figure out in an afternoon. And the quality suffered. Newsletters with terrible typography, brochures with amateur layouts, business cards with clip art. The democratization of publishing meant anyone could publish anything. But it also meant most of what got published looked like it was designed by someone who didn't know what they were doing. Because they didn't. Print shops had standards, training, experience. Desktop publishing had trial and error. And the market accepted lower quality because it came with lower cost and faster turnaround. By the end of 1984, the foundation was laid. The HP LaserJet proved desktop laser printing was viable. The Macintosh proved graphical interfaces could make complex tasks simple. And within 12 months, those two technologies would combine with PageMaker to create an industry that destroyed the one it replaced. 40% of small commercial printers closed between 1985 and 1995. Not because they did bad work, because their customers realized they didn't need them anymore. The LaserJet didn't improve printing. It made professional printers unnecessary. And once a profession becomes unnecessary, the people who built careers in it don't get retrained. They get discarded. Desktop publishing was sold as democratization, liberation from expensive print shops, power to the people. But the people who paid for that liberation were the typesetters, print operators, and small business owners who spent decades mastering a craft that became obsolete in 18 months. Technology didn't free anyone. It just redistributed who paid the cost of progress. And the ones who paid never got asked if they were willing to. December 31st, 1984. 13% of American households own a computer. 87% don't. By every measure, personal computing is still a niche market. But something changed in 1984 that wouldn't become obvious for another decade. The door closed. Not physically, not legally, economically. The families who bought computers in 1984 got a head start on the future. The families who couldn't afford them never caught up. And the gap that opened that year is still widening 42 years later. This is the part nobody talks about when they celebrate 1984 as the year computing became personal. It became personal for 13% of the population. For everyone else, it became inaccessible. Here's what the numbers looked like at the end of 1984. Households earning under $20,000 per year, 3% computer ownership. Households earning $50,000 or more, 28%. That's a 9-to-1 gap. But this is where it gets worse. In 1984, $20,000 was median household income. Half of American families earned less than that, which means 50% of the country had almost no access to computers at home. And schools weren't filling the gap. 1984. California schools received state funding to buy computers. $200 million allocated. Sounds like a lot, until you divide it by the number of students. California had 4.8 million public school students in 1984. $200 million divided by 4.8 million students equals $41 per student. One Apple Macintosh cost $2,495. $41 per student bought nothing. So schools pooled resources. One computer lab per school. 20 computers. 800 students. Each student got 30 minutes of computer time per week, if they were lucky. And this is where the divide cemented. Kids from wealthy families had computers at home. Unlimited access. Trial and error. Exploration. Kids from poor families got 30 minutes a week in a supervised lab learning, basic programming they'd never use. By the time those kids graduated high school in the 1990s, the ones with home computers had 10,000 hours of experience. The ones without had maybe 100 hours. 10,000 versus 100. That gap never closes. But here's what nobody tells you about computer literacy in 1984. It didn't matter yet. In 1984, most jobs didn't require computer skills. Factory work, retail, construction, healthcare, transportation. 70% of employment involved no interaction with computers whatsoever. So the digital divide seemed like a future problem. Something society could fix later when it became important. It became important in the mid-1990s. Internet, email, digital workflows, online applications. Suddenly, computer literacy wasn't optional. It was the baseline for entry-level employment. And the people who'd been locked out in 1984 were still locked out 15 years later. Not because they couldn't learn, because they'd missed the decade of casual exposure that made computers feel intuitive instead of intimidating. This is where the moral imbalance becomes permanent. The families who bought computers in 1984 made an investment. $2,000 to $3,000 for a machine their kids could explore. That investment paid off 10 years later when those kids entered a workforce that suddenly required digital skills. The families who couldn't afford that investment in 1984 paid for it in lost opportunity a decade later. Their kids graduated with fewer skills, fewer options, lower paying jobs. And here's the part that defines generational inequality. Those kids grew up to become parents who still couldn't afford computers for their own children. The divide didn't close. It compounded. By 2010, computer ownership in high-income households, 94%. Low-income households, 57%. The gap narrowed, but it never disappeared. Because by 2010, the new barrier wasn't owning a computer. It was high-speed internet, smartphones, tablets, cloud storage. The goalposts kept moving, and the families who couldn't afford to keep up in 1984 still can't afford to keep up today. 1984. The New York Times publishes an article, The Automation Revolution, Easing Labor's Transition Trauma. The premise: automation will eliminate manufacturing jobs, but workers can retrain for new technical careers. The solution offered: computer literacy programs, community colleges, adult education. What the article doesn't mention: who pays for that retraining? A displaced factory worker in 1984 earned $23,000 a year. Community college computer courses, $500 per semester. 2 semesters to get basic skills. That's $1,000. Plus books. Plus time away from work or family. For workers already living paycheck to paycheck, retraining wasn't an option. It was a luxury they couldn't afford. So they stayed in declining industries until those industries collapsed completely. And when they finally lost their jobs in the 1990s, they were 10 years older, with no computer skills, competing against younger workers who grew up with technology. The automation revolution didn't ease anyone's transition. It abandoned the workers who couldn't afford to transition on their own. But here's what companies learned in 1984. You don't have to retrain workers. You just wait for them to retire or quit. Then you hire younger workers who already have the skills. Between 1984 and 2000, American manufacturing employment fell from 19 million to 17 million workers. 2 million jobs lost. But total employment increased. Service sector, technology, healthcare. The jobs didn't disappear. They changed. And the workers who'd spent 20 years in manufacturing couldn't make the transition. Not because they were incapable, because nobody invested in making the transition possible. Companies saved money by not retraining. Workers paid the cost in unemployment and underemployment. And economists called it creative destruction. Creative for the people who benefited. Destruction for everyone else. December 31st, 1984. 5.6 million personal computers sold in the United States that year. Total use-house households, 86 million. That's 6.5% market penetration in 1 year. And here's what that number represents. 5.6 million families bought into the future. 80 million families were priced out of it. The computer industry celebrated explosive growth. But the majority of the country was still on the outside, and the door was closing. Because by 1990, if you didn't have computer experience, entry-level office jobs were inaccessible. By 2000, if you couldn't use email and the internet, you couldn't apply for most positions. By 2010, if you didn't have a smartphone, you couldn't access gig economy work. Every decade, the baseline shifted. And the people who couldn't afford the baseline in 1984 have been catching up ever since. Some made it, most didn't. 1984 didn't create the digital divide. It made it permanent. Before 1984, computers were rare enough that nobody had them. After 1984, enough people had them that not having one became a disadvantage. And once a disadvantage becomes structural, it's almost impossible to overcome. The 13% who owned computers in 1984 weren't smarter or more hardworking. They were wealthier. And that wealth bought their children a decade of experience that translated into better jobs, higher income, and the ability to buy computers for the next generation. The 87% who didn't own computers weren't less capable. They were poorer. And that poverty locked their children out of the casual exposure that made technology feel natural instead of threatening. 42 years later, 1984 is remembered as the year computing became accessible. The Macintosh, the LaserJet, the promise of personal empowerment through technology. But accessibility is a lie when the entry cost is 3 months' rent. The revolution happened, just not for everyone. And the people who missed it in 1984 are still missing it. Their children missed it. Their grandchildren are missing it. Because the digital divide isn't about technology. It's about who can afford to stay current when the current keeps changing. 1984 was the year we decided that was acceptable. We called it progress. We celebrated the 13% who bought in. And we forgot about the 87% we left behind. They didn't forget. They're still trying to catch up. And the gap just keeps getting wider.